Ambassador Chen Wei-Lin stood in the Great Hall of Neutral Station Omega and watched the alien before her. The Valorian High Executor was tall, almost 3 meters, with skin like polished stone and eyes that held no warmth. Its ceremonial robes flowed like water, and when it moved, the fabric made no sound at all. The hall itself was beautiful. Crystal walls caught the light of distant stars and threw rainbows across the floor. Diplomats from 100 worlds filled the viewing galleries, their strange faces watching history unfold. After 18 months of brutal war, humanity and the Valorian hegemony were about to sign a peace treaty. Chen kept her face calm and pleasant. She had practiced this expression for weeks. Inside, her heart was racing. The war had been terrible. Humanity had only been traveling among the stars for 200 years. The Valorians had been conquering worlds for 10,000. When the first human colony ships entered space, the hegemony claimed as their own. The aliens had responded with immediate violence. They expected the young species to surrender quickly, as so many others had before. They were wrong. Humanity fought back with everything they had. They lost colony after colony, ship after ship, but they never stopped fighting. The Valorians destroyed cities, and humans rebuilt them. The Valorians killed soldiers, and more volunteers stepped forward to take their place. It was like trying to put out a fire by throwing wood on it. After 18 months, the hegemony found itself in an unexpected position. The war was not going as planned. Human tactics were unpredictable. Human weapons were crude but effective, and humans simply refused to admit defeat, even when defeat seemed certain. So the Valorians offered peace. The terms were generous. Humanity would keep its core systems. The hegemony would pay reparations for the damage caused. 3 major hyperspace lanes would be opened for human trade. It was more than anyone expected. It was more than humanity had any right to demand. Chen had read those terms 100 times. Each time, she felt the same cold feeling in her stomach. The Valorians never showed mercy. In 10,000 years of conquest, they had never offered such favorable terms to any species. They crushed their enemies completely or not at all. That was their way. So why were they being so kind now? The answer came from human intelligence agents scattered across the galaxy. Spies who had spent years building networks among the species the hegemony had conquered. Information traders who sold secrets to the highest bidder. Even a few Valorians themselves. Those who had grown tired of endless war and saw something different in these strange, stubborn humans. The reports all said the same thing. The truce was a lie. The Valorians needed time. The war had cost them more than they expected, and their military was stretched thin across 1,000 systems. They needed to rebuild their fleets. They needed to study human tactics and develop counters. They needed to prepare a new weapon, something designed specifically to kill humans and leave everything else untouched. The peace treaty was not an end to the war. It was a pause, a chance for the hegemony to prepare for complete victory. Chen knew all of this as she stood in that beautiful hall. She knew that the alien before her was lying with every gesture of friendship. She knew that the moment the Valorians were ready, they would break the truce and finish what they started. And she signed the treaty anyway. Her hand was steady as she wrote her name on the document. The High Executor made its own mark, a complex symbol that glowed briefly before fading into the paper. The watching diplomats applauded politely. Camera drones captured every moment for the billions watching across the galaxy. Chen smiled and shook the executor's hand. Its grip was cold and dry, like holding a piece of smooth rock. Its eyes met hers, and she saw nothing there but calculation. It thought it was fooling her. It thought she believed in this peace. She thought of her grandmother, who had survived 3 wars on Earth before humanity ever reached the stars. The old woman had taught Chen many things, but one lesson stood above all others. When someone offers you something too good to be true, they are planning to take something far more valuable in return. As the ceremony continued, Chen glanced at a hologram hovering near the back of the hall. Admiral Marcus Stone watched from his flagship, the UES Defiance, orbiting just outside the station's defensive perimeter. His face was a mask, but Chen knew him well enough to read the tension in his jaw, the slight narrowing of his eyes. He knew, too. The Valorians thought they were clever. They thought they had fooled the young species with promises and gifts. They did not understand that humanity had learned the art of deception long before it learned to build starships. Thousands of years of human history were filled with broken treaties, false promises, and wars that began with a handshake. Humans knew what betrayal looked like. They had invented most of its forms. As the champagne flowed and the diplomats celebrated, Chen excused herself to use a private communication terminal. She typed a single word and sent it through channels that did not officially exist. To people whose names appeared on no government record, Trojan, the word would reach Earth Command within the hour. It would trigger a series of events that had been planned for months, prepared in secret by people who never appeared in public. Scientists, engineers, soldiers, and spies, all waiting for this moment. The Valorians thought they had 18 months to prepare for the final war. Perhaps 2 years, if humanity proved to be as foolish as they hoped. They were half right. Humanity did have 18 months, but they were not going to spend that time celebrating a false peace. They were going to use every second to prepare for the war they knew was coming. Chen returned to the celebration and accepted a glass of champagne. She toasted to peace with the High Executor and smiled for the cameras. She played her part perfectly. The grateful diplomat thankful for an end to bloodshed. But in her mind, she was already planning, already calculating, already fighting the next war. The Valorians thought they had won a great victory today. They thought they had bought time to prepare humanity's destruction. They had no idea that humanity was doing exactly the same thing. The truce was a lie. Both sides knew it. But only one side understood that the other knew. And in that small advantage, that tiny gap between what was believed and what was true, humanity would find its salvation. Chen finished her champagne and set down the empty glass. 18 months. Maybe less. It would have to be enough. 6 months after the treaty signing, the galaxy saw humanity celebrating. Tourist ships from a dozen worlds visited Earth, marveling at the blue oceans and green forests. Human music played in alien bars across the frontier. Human art sold for high prices in markets that had never heard of the species before the war. Trade agreements multiplied as merchants discovered that humans would buy almost anything and sell even more. The Valorians watched all of this with satisfaction. Their spies reported that human military spending had dropped. Training exercises had become less frequent. The great warships that had fought so fiercely were now sitting in orbital dockyards, their crews on extended leave. Clearly, the humans had let their guard down. They believed the peace was real. They were enjoying their survival, spending their energy on art and commerce instead of war. Just as the hegemony had hoped, the Valorians saw exactly what humanity wanted them to see. On the mining colony of Tau Ceti IV, Chief Engineer Yuki Tanaka walked through a massive underground facility. The official records called it an agricultural processing center. The food production numbers it reported were impressive, enough to feed 3 colony worlds. No food had ever been grown there. The facility stretched for kilometers beneath the planet's surface, hidden from any satellite or scanner. Inside, thousands of workers operated around the clock in 3 shifts. Furnaces burned hot enough to melt stone. Machines stamped and shaped and assembled. And from the end of the production line came weapons, warships, fighters, missiles, armor, all built from new alloys that Valorian science had never seen, designed to specifications that existed only in encrypted files on isolated computers. Every piece was marked with false serial numbers and stored in hidden locations scattered across human space. Tanaka checked her datapad and nodded with satisfaction. Production was ahead of schedule. In 12 more months, humanity would have a fleet that could match anything the hegemony could build. The Valorians did not know about Tau Ceti IV. They did not know about the 17 other hidden facilities like it, spread across human territory on moons and asteroids and stations that officially did not exist. They saw the public shipyard sitting quiet and assumed humanity had stopped building. They were very wrong. On Earth, in a bunker beneath the Swiss Alps, General Amara Okonkwo ran another war game. She had been running them every night since the treaty signing, sleeping only a few hours before starting again. Her staff had learned to keep coffee ready at all times. The holographic display showed a simulation of Valorian fleet movements. Red symbols for enemy ships, blue for human forces. Okonkwo watched her commanders make decisions, attack and retreat and maneuver, then froze the simulation to point out mistakes. "You are thinking like the enemy expects you to think," she told a young captain who had just lost half his fleet in the simulation. The Valorians have been fighting wars for 10,000 years. They have seen every tactic, every strategy, every clever trick. If you fight the way they expect, You will lose. She reset the simulation and continued. We must fight in ways they cannot predict. Use weapons they have never faced. Attack targets they believe are safe. We are not trying to beat them at their own game. We are trying to change the game entirely. The war games continued through the night. Mistakes were made, lessons were learned, and commanders who had never seen real combat began to understand how to fight an enemy that had been conquering worlds since before humans discovered fire. Meanwhile, in the shadows between stars, humanity's intelligence network grew stronger every day. Agent Sarah Chen, no relation to the ambassador, sat in a dirty bar on a space station at the edge of Valorian territory. Across from her was a creature that looked like a collection of floating crystals, each one catching the dim light and throwing it back in different colors. The creature was a Thessian, one of the first species the hegemony had conquered. The Valorians had destroyed their homeworld 2,000 years ago, and the survivors had scattered across the galaxy, working as servants and laborers for their masters. The Valorians barely noticed them anymore. They were furniture, background noise, beneath consideration, which made them perfect spies. The new shipyard at Nexus 7. The Thessian whispered, its voice like wind chimes in a storm. 32 capital ships under construction. They will be ready in 14 months. Sarah recorded the information on a device hidden in her sleeve. What about the research facility on the fourth moon of Valoris Prime? The bioweapon project. It is nearly complete. The crystal creature shivered, its colors shifting to darker shades. They have tested it on prisoners. Humans. The death is slow and painful. They wanted it that way. Sarah kept her face blank, but something cold settled in her stomach. When will it be ready for deployment? 16 months. Perhaps less if they increase resources. So that was the timeline. In 16 months or less, the Valorians would be ready to break the truce. They would have new ships, new weapons, and a bioweapon designed to kill every human in the galaxy. But now humanity knew, and 16 months was still time enough to prepare. Sarah slid a credit chip across the table. There is more where that came from. For every piece of information, every warning, every secret you can share. The Thessian took the chip and made it disappear somewhere within its crystalline body. Why do you humans fight so hard? The hegemony is ancient and powerful. You are young and weak. Surely you know you cannot win. Sarah smiled, but there was no humor in it. You are right that we are young, but you are wrong about the rest. We have been fighting wars since before we had metal tools. We have killed more of our own kind than any enemy ever could. We nearly destroyed our own world, not once but many times, and we survived anyway. She stood to leave. The Valorians think we are children playing at war. They will learn otherwise. The Thessian watched her go with something that might have been hope. Back on Earth, the High Council met in their secret bunker. President Chen, Admiral Stone, General Okonkwo, and a dozen others gathered around a table covered with reports and projections. The news was grim but not hopeless. The Valorians were building faster than expected. Their bioweapon was nearly ready. Their fleet would be overwhelming, but humanity had advantages too. The hidden shipyards were producing ahead of schedule. The new weapon systems had passed every test. The spy networks were growing stronger, and most importantly, the Valorians still believed their deception was working. We cannot wait for them to attack, General Okonkwo said. If they launch the bioweapon first, we lose everything. But we cannot attack first either, President Chen replied. We would lose our moral standing with the other species. We would become aggressors, no different from the hegemony. Admiral Stone leaned forward. Then we need them to attack first, but on our terms, at a time and place we choose. The council debated through the night. Plans were proposed and rejected. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains above their bunker, they reached a decision. They would set a trap. They would create something the Valorians could not resist, something that would force them to break the truce. And when the hegemony revealed its true nature, humanity would be ready. Project Cassandra was born. The next 12 months would determine the fate of the human race. Either they would outthink an enemy that had been winning wars for 10 millennia, or they would die. There was no middle ground. 14 months after the truce was signed, humanity made an announcement that shocked the galaxy. A scientific survey team had discovered a massive deposit of Helix 7 on a small moon in the Kepler 442 system. The element was rare beyond measure, essential for building faster-than-light engines. Most civilizations counted their Helix 7 supplies in grams. The deposit on Kepler 442b was estimated at several thousand tons. The news spread across 100 worlds within hours. Stock markets surged and crashed as traders tried to understand what this meant. Economists predicted that humanity would become one of the wealthiest species in the galaxy overnight. Military analysts noted that control of such a resource would give humans a strategic advantage for centuries. On the Valorian homeworld, the High Executor received the news with cold fury. It was impossible. The surveys before the war had shown no such deposit. Either humanity had hidden this information during the conflict, or they had somehow created the resource after the fighting ended. Neither option was acceptable. The High Executor summoned its war council to a secret meeting in the deepest chamber of the Imperial Palace. The room was lined with the trophies of 10,000 years of conquest, weapons and banners, and the preserved remains of defeated enemies. The Valorians liked to remind themselves of their victories. "This changes everything," the first strategist said, its voice tight with anger. "If humans control that much Helix 7, they will be able to build fleets faster than we can. They will become a threat we cannot contain." "The truce was always temporary," another council member replied. "We planned to destroy them regardless. This simply makes the matter more urgent." The High Executor listened as its advisors argued. The original plan had been elegant. Wait for the bioweapon to be ready. Wait for the new fleet to be complete. Then strike all human worlds simultaneously. Victory would be total and swift. But now there was a complication. If humanity realized the value of what they had found, they would fortify Kepler 442 with everything they had. The moon would become a fortress. Taking it would cost thousands of ships and years of fighting. Unless they moved now. "The moon is isolated," the first strategist observed. "Far from any major human military installation. Our intelligence shows only survey ships and mining equipment in the system. If we strike quickly, before they can reinforce, we can seize the deposit and fortify it ourselves." "But the truce," a younger council member said. "If we attack openly, the other species will see us as treaty breakers. We will lose allies." The High Executor made a gesture of dismissal. "We will not attack openly. A rogue commander, acting without authorization, will seize the moon. We will condemn the action publicly while privately supporting it. By the time anyone understands what has happened, the deposit will be ours, and the humans will have no choice but to accept the new reality." The plan was approved within the hour. Orders went out to Executor Thelvonis, a veteran commander known for both his skill and his ambition. He would lead a strike force to Kepler 442, capture the moon, and hold it until reinforcements arrived. If humanity responded with force, that would give the hegemony an excuse to abandon the truce entirely. Either way, the Valorians would win. What they did not know, what they could not have suspected, was that the entire situation had been designed by human intelligence. There was no Helix 7 deposit on Kepler 442b. The readings were false, generated by devices that human agents had planted on the moon months earlier. The scientific announcement was carefully crafted propaganda, released through channels that the Valorians would trust. Every piece of evidence that supported the discovery had been manufactured. It was the most elaborate trap in human history. Captain David Oyeleran commanded the UES Horizon, officially a survey vessel supporting the mining operations on Kepler 442b. In reality, the Horizon was a heavily modified destroyer, stripped of all unnecessary equipment to make room for weapons and sensors that did not appear on any official specification. David had been chosen for this mission because he was patient. He could wait for days without moving, watching his screens, ready to act the moment opportunity appeared. He had done this during the war, hunting Valorian supply convoys in the empty spaces between stars. He had been very good at it. Now he waited in the asteroid field near the moon, his ship running silent with all systems on minimum power. 24 other vessels waited with him, hidden among the tumbling rocks. They had been in position for 3 weeks, waiting for the enemy to take the bait. On his screens, David watched the hyperspace sensors. Any moment now, the flash came without warning. A burst of energy as 12 Valorian warships emerged from faster-than-light travel. They were beautiful in their way, elegant curves and gleaming hulls that seemed to flow like liquid metal. They were also carrying enough weapons to turn the moon into rubble. David counted the ships. 12. More than expected, but within the range they had planned for. The Valorians wanted to be sure of victory. They were about to learn a painful lesson about certainty. Executor Thelvanus stood on the command bridge of his flagship and surveyed the target. The moon was small, gray, covered with mining equipment and temporary structures. 2 human survey ships orbited nearby, their weapons signatures minimal. This would be easy. All ships advance, he commanded. Secure the orbital space. Ground forces will deploy once the area is clear. The Valorian fleet moved forward in perfect formation. They had done this 1,000 times before, on 1,000 worlds. The procedure was automatic, polished by centuries of practice. They did not notice the asteroids that were slightly larger than they should be. David Oyelaran watched the enemy fleet pass his position and felt his heart pounding in his chest. Wait, he told himself. Wait for the signal. Aboard the horizon, his crew sat at their stations in absolute silence. They had trained for this moment for months. Everyone knew their role. Everyone knew what was at stake. The Valorian fleet reached optimal position, perfectly centered between the hidden human forces. On the moon's surface, concealed defensive platforms tracked the enemy ships. Solutions locked and ready. David transmitted 3 words on a frequency that did not officially exist. The trap springs. Across human space, 18 months of preparation woke up. In the asteroid field around Kepler 442, the hidden ships powered their weapons and began to move. On the moon's surface, defensive platforms rose from beneath false rock and opened fire. In 17 other locations along the border, human fleets emerged from hiding and began coordinated strikes against Valorian targets. Executor Thelvanus had exactly 3 seconds to understand that he had been tricked before the first missiles struck his flagship. The asteroids were not asteroids. They were weapons platforms, disguised and waiting. The survey ships were not survey ships. They were warships, wearing false skins. The mining operation was not a mining operation. It was a killing field. Thelvanus gave orders, tried to organize his fleet, but everything was happening too fast. Human weapons tore through Valorian shields with impossible ease. The elegant warships that had conquered 1,000 worlds broke apart under fire from weapons they had never seen before. In the asteroid field, David Oyelaran commanded his ship with cold precision. He had waited 3 weeks for this moment. He had waited 18 months before that. Now, finally, the waiting was over. All ships engage, he said. No survivors. The Battle of Kepler 442 lasted less than an hour. When it was over, 12 Valorian warships had been reduced to expanding clouds of debris. The hegemony's rogue commander was dead, along with his entire crew. But this was only the beginning. The trap at Kepler 442 was just one part of a much larger operation. Across the border, human fleets were striking at supply depots, shipyards, and staging areas. Everything the Valorians had built for their planned genocide was being destroyed. The hegemony had thought they were hunting prey. They had just discovered that the prey had teeth. David Oyelaran looked at the wreckage on his screens and allowed himself a small smile. 18 months of secrecy. 18 months of patience. 18 months of pretending to be weak while growing strong. The war had truly begun. And humanity was winning. The Valorian High Executor received the reports in stunned silence. Kepler 442. Gone. Nexus 7 shipyard. Destroyed. Supply depot at the threshold. Burning. Staging area in the void. Reduced to debris. In less than 12 hours, 40% of the hegemony's forward military capability had ceased to exist. The humans had struck everywhere at once. 17 different attacks, perfectly coordinated, hitting targets that the Valorians had believed were secret. Ships that should not have existed had emerged from hiding places that defied detection. Weapons that violated known physics had torn through shields designed to withstand anything. It was impossible. It was unthinkable. And yet it was happening. Admiral Marcus Stone stood on the command bridge of the UES Prometheus and watched the Valorian shipyard at Nexus 7 burn. The dreadnought he commanded was not supposed to exist. It had been built in pieces at 17 different hidden facilities, assembled in secret, and crewed by officers who had been officially retired or transferred to desk positions. The Prometheus was 3 times larger than any human warship the Valorians had seen during the First War. Its weapons were built from alloys that did not appear in any database. Its shields used principles that human scientists had developed specifically to counter Valorian technology. It was a ship designed for one purpose: to kill Valorians. Stone watched as his fleet finished the destruction of the shipyard. 36 warships had been under construction there, each one intended for the final assault on human space. Now they were debris, their half-built hulls cracking apart in the cold vacuum. "This is Admiral Stone of the United Earth Systems." He broadcast on all frequencies, making sure the message would reach the hegemony's leadership. 18 months ago, you signed a truce you never intended to honor. We knew. We have always known. He paused, letting the words sink in. The difference between your species and mine? When we make a promise, we keep it. We promise to defend humanity. Today, we fulfill that promise. Across the border, the coordinated strikes continued. Human fleets appeared where no fleets should be, striking with precision and disappearing before the Valorians could respond. Every target had been chosen carefully. Every attack had been planned for months. General Amara Okonkwo coordinated the campaign from her command center beneath the Swiss Alps. The holographic display showed the entire theater of operations, hundreds of blue and red symbols representing ships and stations and battles in progress. She had been preparing for this day for 18 months, every night running war games, studying Valorian tactics, identifying weaknesses, every day training commanders, testing weapons, refining plans. Now all of that work was being put to the test. Third Fleet reports success at Objective 7, one of her officers announced. Enemy losses estimated at 80%. Our losses at 12%. Fourth Fleet has engaged at Objective 9. Heavy resistance, but holding. Seventh Fleet requesting permission to pursue retreating enemy vessels toward Objective 12. Okonkwo made decisions rapidly, shifting resources, adjusting timelines, exploiting opportunities as they appeared. The Valorians were reacting slowly, still trying to understand what was happening. Their rigid command structure, designed for steady conquest over centuries, could not adapt to a situation that changed every hour. Human command was different. Authority was distributed. Commanders were trusted to make decisions without waiting for approval. Information flowed freely. When a situation changed, human forces changed with it. This was not an accident. Human military doctrine had been developed over thousands of years of fighting each other. Wars in jungles and deserts, in mountains and cities, on land and sea and air. Every lesson written in blood had been preserved and studied and applied. The Valorians had conquered species that had never known war. They had faced enemies who surrendered when the odds turned against them. They had never fought a species that had been killing itself for millennia and had learned every terrible trick that violence could teach. They were learning now. In the ruins of the Nexus 7 shipyard, a single Valorian escape pod drifted among the debris. Inside, Sub-Commander Velkath watched in horror as human ships moved through the wreckage, confirming kills and destroying anything that might be salvaged. Velkath had served the hegemony for 200 years. He had participated in the conquest of a dozen worlds. He had never experienced defeat like this. He had never imagined it was possible. The humans had known. They had known about the fake truce, about the bioweapon project, about the shipyards and supply depots. They had known everything, and they had let the Valorians believe they were fooling them. It was terrifying. It changed everything Velkath thought he understood about this young species. Back on Earth, President Chen received reports of the first day's operations with grim satisfaction. The initial strikes had succeeded beyond expectations, but she knew the war was far from over. The hegemony was wounded, not dead. They still had vast resources, ancient allies, and a pride that would never accept defeat. They would strike back with everything they had, which was exactly what humanity was counting on. The Valorians had one advantage that no amount of preparation could overcome: numbers. Even after the surprise attacks, they still commanded more ships, more soldiers, more industrial capacity than humanity could match. A long war of attrition would favor the hegemony, so humanity would not fight a long war. The human strategy was built on one fundamental principle: the Valorians would be too angry to think clearly. They would gather their remaining forces and strike at the heart of human civilization. They would want revenge, want to make humanity pay for this humiliation. And when they came, humanity would be ready. Admiral Stone received his orders as the Prometheus completed its work at Nexus 7. Return to Sol. Prepare for defensive operations. The enemy would come, and they would come in force. Set course for Earth, Stone told his navigation officer. Maximum speed. The great dreadnought turned toward home, joining dozens of other human vessels making the same journey. They had won the first battle. Now they had to survive the response. In the Imperial Palace on the Valorian homeworld, the High Executor called for the Grand Armada to assemble. Every ship, every ally, every resource the hegemony could gather. They would converge on Sol and destroy humanity once and for all. This was exactly what the humans had predicted. 18 months of planning, 18 months of building, 18 months of waiting, all leading to this moment. The Valorians would throw their full strength at Earth, and humanity would be ready to receive them. The preparations at Sol had been the most secret of all. Defense platforms that looked like communication satellites, weapons hidden in asteroids, ships disguised as cargo haulers, and the hidden fleet, waiting in the shadows of Jupiter and Saturn. But humanity had one more surprise, the biggest of all. During those 18 months of false peace, human diplomats had been busy. They had reached out to species the hegemony had conquered, destroyed, or dismissed. They had offered something the Valorians never had. Respect, partnership, hope. The Thessians had answered. The Korda remnant had answered. The Pale Wanderers, who had not shown themselves in 1,000 years, had answered. When the Valorians came to Sol, they would not find humanity alone. General Okonkwo looked at the strategic display showing the expected arrival of the enemy armada. 3 days, perhaps 4. Time enough to finish preparations. Time enough to rest, briefly, before the final battle. She thought of her grandmother, who had survived 3 wars on Earth before humanity reached the stars. The old woman had taught her that victory went not to the strongest, but to those who were willing to sacrifice everything for what they believed in. Humanity believed in survival. They believed in freedom. They believed that they had earned their place among the stars through blood and struggle, and stubborn refusal to give up. The Valorians were about to learn what that belief was worth. Stone brought the Prometheus into Earth orbit and looked down at the blue world below. His homeworld, the world his ancestors had nearly destroyed a dozen times over through war and pollution and stupidity. The world that had somehow produced a species stubborn enough to reach the stars despite everything. He would defend it with his life. Every human in the fleet would do the same. The enemy was coming. Let them come. The Valorian Grand Armada emerged from hyperspace, and for a moment, the stars themselves seemed to dim. 400 capital ships, thousands of support vessels, fighters and bombers and landing craft beyond counting. It was the largest fleet the hegemony had assembled in 2,000 years, gathered from every corner of their empire. Allies had sent ships. Vassals had contributed soldiers. Even species that had been conquered centuries ago had been forced to provide resources. High Executor Valkora stood on the command bridge of the Imperial throne, the greatest warship the Valorians had ever built. He looked at Earth through the viewport, a small blue marble hanging in the darkness, and felt nothing but contempt. This was the world that had defied the hegemony. This was the species that had humiliated his people. In a few hours, it would be nothing but ash. Begin the approach, he commanded. Destroy everything that moves. The armada moved forward like a wave of death, spreading across the solar system. Sensors reached out, mapping targets, identifying threats. The humans had fortified their home, but it would not be enough. Nothing could be enough against the full might of the Valorian hegemony. Then the sensors found something unexpected. Ships. Hundreds of ships. Not human ships. The Thessians came first, their crystalline vessels glittering like stars against the darkness. They had been the first species the Valorians conquered, 2,000 years ago. Their homeworld had been destroyed, their people scattered. The hegemony had thought them broken forever. They were wrong. Behind the Thessians came the Korda, their massive warships bristling with weapons that had been hidden for centuries. The Korda had surrendered to the hegemony 3,000 years ago, choosing slavery over extinction. They had waited, and watched, and remembered. Now they had chosen to fight. And behind the Korda came the Pale Wanderers, ships so ancient that no one knew who had built them. The Wanderers had vanished from the galaxy 1,000 years ago. retreating to the spaces between stars. No one had seen them since. Until now, 37 species had answered humanity's call. 37 species that the hegemony had conquered, oppressed, or ignored. They had come to Sol not because humanity had promised them victory, but because humanity had offered them something the Valorians never had: hope. Valkoris stared at the display, unable to believe what he was seeing. This was impossible. These species were broken. They were defeated. They could not be here, could not be standing with the humans against the might of the hegemony. "High Executor," his communications officer said, voice trembling. "The humans are requesting to speak with you." Valkoris wanted to refuse, wanted to simply attack and destroy, but something held him back. Curiosity, perhaps, or fear. "Put them through." President Amara Santos appeared on the screen. She had been a general before she was a politician, and her eyes held the calm confidence of someone who had faced death many times and never blinked. "High Executor," she said, "you came to destroy us." "I came to end a threat to galactic peace," Valkoris replied. "You attacked our shipyards. You murdered our people. You have shown yourself to be dangerous and uncontrollable." Santos smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "We attacked military targets that you were building to destroy us. We struck first because we knew you were planning genocide. We had the cure for your bioweapon 6 months ago, by the way. The one designed to kill every human in the galaxy." Valkoris felt something cold settle in his stomach. They knew. They knew everything. "You broke the truce," he said, but even to his own ears, the words sounded hollow. "No, you broke it when you sent ships to Kepler 442. We simply responded." Santos leaned forward. "But I did not ask to speak with you to argue about who started what. I wanted to offer you a choice." "What choice?" "Surrender. Accept new terms. The species you have conquered will be freed. Your empire will be reduced to your home systems. You will pay reparations for the damage you have caused. In return, we will let you live." Valkoris actually laughed. "You are outnumbered. Your allies are refugees and remnants. You cannot win, perhaps. But let me tell you something about humanity, Executor." Santos's voice grew hard. "We did not survive our own history by being the strongest. We survived by being too stubborn to die and too clever to fight fair. Your bioweapon? Neutralized. Your secret hyperspace routes? Mined. Your ally, the Mordath Consortium? They switched sides an hour ago, in exchange for liberation of their occupied worlds." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You came here expecting slaughter. You will find something else entirely. So I ask you again. Surrender, or die. The choice is yours." Valkoris cut the communication and turned to his tactical display. The humans were bluffing. They had to be. But as he studied the formation of the Allied fleet, as he saw the weapons signatures of ships he did not recognize, as he realized that every advantage he had counted on had been taken away, doubt began to creep into his mind. "All ships attack," he commanded anyway. Pride would not let him do otherwise. The Battle of Sol began. It was brutal. It was bloody. It was everything that both sides had feared and prepared for. Valorian warships crashed against human defenses. Human counterattacks tore through hegemony formations. Allied vessels struck from unexpected angles, their captains fighting with the fury of species who had waited centuries for revenge. The battle lasted 3 days. Admiral Stone commanded the human fleet from the Prometheus, moving his ships like pieces on a chessboard. General Okonkwo coordinated ground defenses, shooting down landing craft that tried to reach Earth's surface. Captain Oyelaran led a strike wing that destroyed 2 Valorian carriers before anyone knew he was there. Ambassador Chen, the woman who had signed the false peace treaty 18 months ago, coordinated the Allied fleets, translating between species who had never fought together before, turning chaos into cooperation. And slowly, inevitably, the tide turned. The Valorian armada had been built for conquest, for overwhelming force against weaker enemies. It was not built for a fight against an enemy that knew every tactic, anticipated every move, and refused to give up no matter the cost. On the 3rd day, the Imperial throne was surrounded. Its shields had failed. Its weapons were exhausted. High Executor Valkoris stood on his damaged bridge and watched human ships close in for the kill. A final communication request came through. President Santos again. "Surrender," she said. This is your last chance. Valkorus looked at the destruction around him. His fleet was broken. His allies had fled. The Great Armada was debris spreading across the solar system. How? He whispered. How did you know? Santos's expression softened slightly. Because we have been where you are. We have been the conquerors and the conquered. We have built empires and watched them fall. We know what betrayal looks like because we invented most of its forms. She shook her head. You thought you were dealing with children. You were dealing with survivors. Valkorus closed his eyes. For 10,000 years, the Valorian hegemony had conquered and destroyed. They had never imagined that a young species from a small blue world could bring them down. I surrender, he said. The war was over. In the months that followed, the galaxy was transformed. The Valorian hegemony was dismantled, its conquered species freed, its military reduced to a fraction of its former strength. Ambassador Chen drafted a new treaty, one with real enforcement mechanisms and genuine consequences for violation. The species that had fought alongside humanity formed a new alliance, the Interstellar Commonwealth. For the first time in history, dozens of civilizations stood as equals, united not by conquest, but by choice. On Earth, in Geneva, a memorial was built for those who had fallen. It listed every name, human and alien, of those who had died defending freedom. At the base of the memorial, an inscription was carved in 100 languages. We are not combative by nature, but we are survivors by necessity. Underestimate us at your peril. Ambassador Chen stood before that memorial on the day it was dedicated. She thought about the treaty signing 18 months ago, the champagne and the false smiles, the certainty that betrayal was coming. Humanity had walked into that room knowing exactly what the Valorians planned. They had smiled anyway, signed anyway, and then they had gone home and prepared for the war they knew was coming. Some species called it paranoia, others called it cynicism. Chen called it history. Humanity had learned its lessons in blood across thousands of years. They knew that trust had to be earned, that peace had to be defended, and that the best way to avoid a fight was to make absolutely sure you would win it. The Valorians had thought the truce was their deception. They never realized it was humanity's opportunity. Chen placed her hand on the cool stone of the memorial and made a silent promise to those who had died. Their sacrifice would not be forgotten. Their victory would not be wasted. Humanity would build something better, something worth defending, something that would last. The stars belonged to everyone now, and humanity would make sure it stayed that way. Forever.